Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this special council meeting. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their elders past and present. I would like to advise everyone that the audio of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. I request everyone to please turn off your mobile phones. I remind you that any recording of the meeting, proceedings and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted. And councillors and city officers are requested to disclose any declarations of financial interests or interests affecting impartiality and are requested to activate their microphones when addressing the meeting. So, with that, welcome. Item 1 is the declaration of opening and announcement of visitors. I declare the meeting open at 1 minute past 6 p.m. Councillor Glenn Cridland has requested to attend tonight's meeting via telephone. So, in accordance with regulations 14C and 14C of the Local Government Administration Regulations 1996, I've authorised Councillor Cridland to attend the meeting by electronic means. Are you hearing us okay, Councillor Cridland?
I certainly am, thank you.
Excellent, thank you. I'd also like to acknowledge and welcome our local state Member of Parliament, Mr Jeff Baker, MLA. Welcome, Mr Baker. And a little disclaimer, the City of South Perth disclaims any liability for any loss arising for any person or body relying on any statement, discussion, recommendation or decision made during this meeting. That brings us to item 2, which is announcements from the presiding member. That's me. There's no such announcements tonight. Item 3 is attendance. Item 3.1 is apologies. There are no apologies this evening. Item 3.2 is approved leaves of absence. And Councillor Glenn Cridland has an approved leave of absence for the period of 14 March 2023 to 31 March 2023 inclusive, but of course he's attending electronically tonight. And Councillor Ken Manolis has an approved leave of absence from the period of 28 March 2023 to 30 April 2023 inclusive. Councillors, item 4 is declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations of interest that they wish to make this evening? Councillor Cridland, any declarations of interest?
Not from me, thank you.
No, thank you. Okay, no declarations of interest then. Item 5 is public question time. So I now open public question time at 3 minutes past 6 p.m. We've received 2 written submissions prior to tonight's meeting. So I'd like to begin by inviting Ms. Catherine Jafari of Waterford, if you'd like to come to the microphone, and we look forward to your questions. And we have Catherine Jafari here. We do not. Okay. In that case, I'm going to move on to the next person who's submitted written questions prior to tonight's meeting. That is Ms. Joanne Ord of Como. Ms. Ord, if you'd like to come to the microphone. And we look forward to your questions. Can we activate the microphone for Ms. Ord, please? There we go. Far away.
You can hear me?
We can.
Okay, so these questions relate to the project costings and expenditure to date. So the stage 1 indicative BCE of 61 million in the agenda attachment didn't appear to provide the associated limits of accuracy for that attachment only, just for that part. Can the city advise if there are applicable limits of accuracy to this estimate, and if so, what are they?
Thank you. Ms. Emprima?
Thank you, Chair. The associated limits of accuracy are not typically included in an indicative cost budget cost estimate for a pre-concept stage estimate. The city understands the risks associated with cost estimates at this stage of a project, and as detailed in the report, indicated that a budget of 70 to 75 million would be more prudent.
Thank you, Ms. Amprimo. Your second question, Ms. Ord?
Yep. Question 2. The city has been working towards commencement of the proposed RAF project since 2017 and 18. and the annual budgets over this period indicate the city has allocated considerable funds towards the progression of this project. Can the city provide the total expenditure to date?
Thank you. Ms Amprema?
The city publishes the inception to date expenditure on the RAF in its monthly financial statements presented to the monthly ordinary council meeting. At the end of February 2023, the inception to date expenditure amounted to $1,593,999. This information is contained at the bottom of the last page of attachment D in the OCM minutes. Operating revenue and expenditure, item 1042, monthly financial statements, February 2023. It should be noted that allocated budget does not always result in expenditure.
Thank you, Ms Amprema. And your final question, Ms Ord?
Yes, question 3. If the city obtains approval to retain the $5.5 million from the federal government, would the city consider using these funds to replace those expended on the RAF to date, or other expended funds considered as a regret spend?
Thank you. Ms Amprema?
The city has already expensed these funds as part of the previous financial year end processes. The city's preference is for the full amount, 5.5 million, should to be spent on infrastructure projects that offer a tangible benefit to the community. Any expenditure would need to meet the parameters set by the federal government if they agreed to the city retaining the 5.5 million.
Thank you, Ms Amprema, and thank you, Ms Ord, for your questions. I now just check to see if Ms Catherine Jafari has arrived in the meantime. That's a no. Okay. Governance, were there any late questions received in the tray? No, there weren't. Okay. Well, in that case, I now close public question time at 6 p.m. We now move on to item 6, which is deputations. This evening, we'll have 6 speakers who will have up to 10 minutes to address council. And I'd like to begin by inviting Mr. Jordan Anthony Smith of Como, who is speaking for the officer recommendation at item 7.0.1. Welcome, Mr. Smith.
Am I on?
You are indeed. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening to everyone, the council, and to Mayor Milner. And a good evening to everyone here tonight. Here we are again talking about the RAF, and it's been quite the saga, and I would say a stressful time, but it's also been quite dark, especially leading up to this council meeting tonight. We had the special electors meeting not too long ago, and the behavior there, in my opinion, was quite shocking. It was as though the 5 councillors here were put on some kind of trial for committing a crime. What was their crime? Being financially responsible? For being realistic about expectations? The concerns of the councillors have been confirmed by an independent source. After the agenda was released, we had more vitriol, unfortunately. I want to share a few. Well, it seems we have our councillors to thank for keeping the city of South Perth residents in the dark ages. These councillors need to be held accountable and sacked. One thing is for certain, that these councillors will be remembered for their legacy: no recreation facilities. The councillors that no doubt will be patting themselves on the back, and the COSPRA Luddites, along with them, all 28 of them, have done the community of the city of South Perth a massive disservice and will result in more cost in the long run. These councillors will be remembered for their legacy. Yes, they will, and I'll touch on that later. Finally, it seems we're getting closer to a consensus. The officers of the city, the majority of this council, and I would argue a large number of residents and concerned ratepayers. Mayor Milner, you suggested that this council will be known as the council that killed the RAF. In my view, this council has done what every single household is doing right now: cutting back on costs. We even had the front page of the West Australian making jokes about the cost of a head of lettuce. Families are eating out less, consuming less alcohol, buying home brand products, scaling back. And many are dreading the mortgage cliff that's to come for many families. Meanwhile, you have proponents of this project doubling down, criticizing the no rate increase mandate. These 5 councillors have been the adults in the room. They have been the turtles that is, as the late, great Dick Gregory put it. They had a hard shell and were willing to stick their necks out on this issue. These councillors faced the metaphorical pitchforks, the rah, rah, rah. Despite the enraged petition, despite the commit to doing what people say or else, they stayed true to principle. But they also showed flexibility and willingness to try by endorsing a staged approach. But now that we've been informed that the staged approach isn't even viable, then we have to accept that reality. When you have local, state, and federal governments living within their means, doing their due diligence, we have better outcomes for everyone. For those who've been supportive of this project, including Mayor Milner, although I disagree with the scope of this project, at least you've been consistent from the beginning. You have championed this project to the very end, so proponents of the RAF can't say they didn't have a dog in the fight or a champion in the corner. I saw the mayor with my own eyes out campaigning in the heat of the summer for Councillor Worland to make sure that this project had a chance. He also went to bat for his councillors as well when they were harassed and abused for voting against hiring the project manager. Mayor Milner said, "Please let me be clear. It is never acceptable to physically or verbally abuse or intimidate councillors, so I commend you for that." And to those who genuinely want this RAF, who also disagree with the RAF in its current form, and despite the unsavory means a small number of you employed to bend this council to your will, many of you have fought hard and no one can doubt your determination. The issue with this project is not in principle or the services, it's the scope, scale, it's the timing, it's the location. When the economy shifts, perhaps we can look at this again, but let the plan be greatly revised. We live in a great city. We have a great councillor and a great mayor. I want to commend the officers as well who have been able to respond to independent reports and advise this council wisely. RAF needs serious reflection, and until then, I'll drive 15 minutes to get to Lord's and Subi for my Monday night basketball, and there are pools nearby, and where we lack in our own facilities here, we make up for in the proximity to others. The greatness of a city does not hinge upon an aquatic center. And the greater argument that I've made here before is the culture around politics and how we spend taxpayer money. Council has the opportunity tonight to wipe the city's hands clean of that $20 million federal funding that is dirty money. The stories get worse and worse for the Liberals and Nationals. I heard it from myself, the former Deputy Prime Minister of New South Wales, boasting and bragging about being John Pork Barilaro, making a mockery of taxpayers and the blood and sweat they shed to put money into the Treasury, as though it was all there for vote buying. Labour is in New South Wales, the member for South Perth, Jeff Baker, and the member for Swan, Zaneta Mascarenhas. The Australian public has rejected these pork barreling practices and the parties that have engaged in it, and it would be hypocritical to keep this money. The $20 million was from the Female Facilities and Water Safety Stream program, and it was pitched as such by the former Prime Minister, but very little of that made it to female facilities. Most of it went to these grand equality facilities, once again in marginal seats to buy votes. I welcome the sensible and fair recommendation by the officers to keep the $5 million to go towards improving facilities for our city. That is in keeping with the spirit of that funding and something we all can get behind. I had concerns when Mayor Milner seemed to be forming a coalition, and I expressed them publicly. It didn't seem right to me, but as it turns out, this is with the most recent election, it's within the rules, and I learned that other mayors do the same. Another mayor gave me a grim warning after his defense of Mayor Milner. He said, "Jordan, the proposed changes to the Local Government Act will include optional preferential voting, and that will change the way people vote in local government, and it will signal the entry of party politics into grassroots communities. That overt party political interference will be significantly more impactful than this mayor's endorsement." That's a rather bleak assessment, if you ask me. Local politics is kind of a breath of fresh air. The fact that I get to come here tonight and actually address you directly, I think is a wonderful thing. It's not an opportunity we really get at a state level, but it's a breath of fresh air, and I think it's a great thing to be a part of. And yeah, lots of things are changing. I think this debate has been quite strong, and I think we'll probably see more of it moving forward. But yeah, so to the 5 councillors, what's your legacy? Financially responsible, honest and resistant to emotionally driven arguments, bold in the face of unreasonable and hostile opposition. And as for the council as a whole, a council that got people engaged in and invested in our city, a council that makes people feel part of the process and a part of their city, a council that gives people a chance to speak, but ultimately making the hard decision that is for the greater good of the city, which is your ultimate responsibility. So the council has an opportunity tonight to follow wise counsel from the officers of the city and put this matter to rest so we can all move on. Don't feel obligated to push through because you ran a campaign based heavily on being a proponent of the RAF. I don't think this is a time either for symbolic votes of support. Council doesn't always have to agree, and it helps to have a diversity of opinion. But when matters are as plain as day as they are now, that the RAF is not viable in either form or any form that has been presented, I won't be surprised nor concerned if there's a united council from mayor to the newest member here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your deputation, Mr. Smith. Councillors, Mr. Smith, please. I'm just going to ask if any of the elected members have any questions for you. Elected members, are there any questions for Mr. Smith this evening? No. Councillor Cridland?
No, thank you.
No. You're off the hook. Thank you. So, I'd now like to invite Ms. Cecilia Brooke of South Perth, who is speaking for the officer recommendation at item 7.0.1. Welcome, Ms. Brooke. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and councillors and city staff. Councillors, it has been a long and costly journey to get to this point in time, where you now have a financially sensible recommendation concerning the future of the RAF in front of you. Over time, this project has gendered an unprecedented amount of community interest, and rightly so. As you know, COSPRA have continually questioned the financial aspects of the proposed RAF and its operational costs. The indicative budget cost estimates and the latest RAF updated feasibility document provided in agenda attachments A and D show that the financial position of the RAF, even in the latest cut-down version, is untenable in today's fiscal climate. The realisation that the RAF is as advertised to the community, had no financial certainty was highlighted by a motion put to Council by Councillor Choi. The resulting responses from various state government departments clarified the lack of financial support available from the state government. In fact, preceding Councillor Choi's motion, the former Minister for Sport, the Honourable Mick Murray, MLA, on the 5th of October 2020, wrote to our previous CEO, Mr. Jeff Glass, stating that there would be no money from the state government for the RAF. I have read Mr. Murray's letter out twice before in this chamber. His letter was followed up with correspondence from the Honourable Kate Doust, MLC, also explaining the lack of support from the WA government. COSPRA thanks Councillor Choi and all councillors who supported her original motion and who have questioned many other aspects of the proposal. All have made difficult decisions at every stage of the project. Unfortunately, various social media platforms and public meetings became conduits to put pressure on councillors who are being called on to make these important financial decisions. But unfortunately, it seems this is how we now interact within our communities. Fortunately, councillors demonstrated their integrity and fortitude when voting on various aspects concerning the RAF. And now we have an officer recommendation that once again requires similar integrity and fortitude to ensure the city does not embark on a project that will put a huge financial strain on the city and its ratepayers and residents. We also acknowledge the time and effort contributed by council administration in endeavouring to bring to fruition such a costly project. These efforts must not be downplayed. And whilst we may not have all agreed with all the answers provided to our questions, we do believe the correct way forward has now been determined. The reassessment of the RAF project has been undertaken by Anita and Primo, Director Infrastructure Services, and has allowed for a measured look at the outcomes that we're threatening more than just the construction of a RAF. We appreciated the work by Anita and the team that she has and must have had to undertake to complete this task. I would now like to bring you back to earth and focus on the items that should also be considered when making your determinations tonight. For example, attachment A of the agenda shows that a cut-down version of a RAF at Collier Park Golf Course will cost about $61.3 million. And you might say, well, the City of South Perth should be able to manage that. What is not obvious in the report are the extra costs that would need to be expended to take the project to a workable finalisation. For example, upgrades to the Collier Park Golf Club car park, provision of a temporary trading office at the golf course valued at $700,000, roadworks on Hayman Road to allow for safe ingress and egress of cars, provision of artificial turf to new golf hitting zones. These items are essential to the overall success of the cut-down version of the RAF. That is stage one, and no doubt there'll be more that aren't mentioned. The $61.3 million is looking more like $67 million. That is what we have always been concerned about, not the idea of having a swimming pool for South Perth, but it has now been recognised the actual cost to the city and ratepayers. Councillors, city officers have provided their view on the project, which is that the swimming pool is currently unviable. And we ask that you, as councillors, take all this into consideration and vote to accept the council officer's recommendation. Maybe there will be another time when the residents of the City of South Perth can consider the provision of a facility like a swimming pool or even a smaller community venue, but the time is not now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Brooke, for your deputation. Councillors, does anyone wish to ask any questions of Ms Brooke this evening? Councillor Cridland?
No, thank you. Mr.
No.
Mayor.
Thank you, Ms Brooke.
Mr. Mayor.
I'd now like to invite Mr Hill, Trevor Hill, who is speaking for the officer recommendation at item 7.0.1. Welcome, Mr Hill, and we look forward to your deputation.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, councillors and council officers. I'm speaking tonight to support the council officers' 6 recommendations that outline the steps required to formally put a stop to the RAF project. I'd also like to point out that I'm speaking tonight as a resident and a ratepayer of the City of South Perth. I am not representing anybody or any group that I may or may not be affiliated with. It's just me. I may not have been around or lived in the city for as long as some of the people that might be here tonight, but over the past 44 years that I have been here, I know that having a swimming pool somewhere in the city has always been a topical subject. Finances have never been proved viable for that pool to be built. Councillors, hindsight is a wonderful thing, and all we can do is learn from the past. Looking at the RAF, more importantly, we need to plan and look to the future. Looking at the RAF, what have we learned from the past? There was a lot of community involvement, and there still is. Workshops and information sessions were held. So why do we now need to ask the CEO not to progress the delivery of the RAF? Based on my many years of working with projects as a project manager, I believe it comes down to assumptions. In fact, too many assumptions. Making bold assumptions in large projects is itself a huge risk. Why, I hear you say? Let's take a look at that, because to assume is to make an ass of you and me. Now, this may sound flippant, but it is oh so true, and this applies to the RAF. The council officers have identified that as being the loss of reputation to the city, but this is not a reason to continue with a loss-making project such as the RAF. These assumptions for the RAF included, but are not limited to, financial assumptions, locational assumptions, operational assumptions, and assumptions of external partners' involvement. The officer report outlines these assumptions and the now known outcomes if the RAF project should be forced to continue. Right now, as shown in the officer report, we can't actually afford a RAF on the scale that was anticipated, and even though some of us may want a pool, we don't desperately need a pool. There are new aquatic facilities being provided close to our city, and still others close by. What does the future hold? There are plenty of opportunities to provide other community facilities to improve social activities, health-related activities, and ways to engage the younger members of our city. For example, now I'm blue skying a bit here, council may or could investigate the upgrade of the George Burnett Centre to provide more and better basketball courts, or maybe a lower cost aquatic playground of a sort with an associated picnic area. The options are extensive. It may be unfortunate, but I believe the evidence is there to show that any move to extend the RAF, even in a cut-down version, is not financially viable. Councillors, I believe you can say you've done your best to get this project over the line, but the odds are overwhelmingly against the RAF. I urge you all, councillors, to stand up and be financially open and accountable, and that requires that you vote to accept the officer's recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Hill. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to ask Mr Hill any questions this evening? Councillor Cridland?
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
No. Thank you for your deputation, Mr Hill.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
I'd now like to invite Mr Bob Mitchell of South Perth, who is speaking for the officer recommendation at item 7.0.1. And please, no more interruptions from the gallery. That would be appreciated.
Thank you, Mayor Milner and councillors. Mine is not going to be an I told you so type thing, because I don't think that's necessary. I'm more interested in the facts that have now come out that show quite conclusively that the RAF is non-viable in almost any iteration you want to look at. But my first question and comment relates to a procedural thing, because I've seen in previous meetings an alternative motion sometimes put that takes the place of what the officer recommendation is, sometimes for the better. And a good example is Mary Choi's alternative motion that was put in relation to approaches to the state government. I would like to ask whether the timing that we have to put in our request for a deputation, which is 24 hours before the meeting, it's almost exactly the same time as a notice of alternative motion from any councillor. And so that it could be that someone here knows that there is an alternative motion on the books. And I'd just like to ask the direct question, are the Mayor or the CEO aware of any alternative motion on the 7.0.1 RAF item?
Mr Mitchell, I'm just going to interrupt for a moment. You are aware that you've elected to make a deputation rather than ask a public question?
Well, what I'm saying is that I may be speaking to something that is going to be outdated as soon as you open the business. So I just thought it was a fair question. If there is an officer recommendation that's been superseded perhaps by an alternative motion, it would be of interest for us to know at this point of time.
Noted, but please continue with your deputation.
Okay. Now, the timeliness of this officer recommendation can't be understated. We are all living in very difficult times. Headlines across every media you can think of as saying, you know, we are in very unusual financial and economic times. And I think that the fact that it's been a very reputable consultant that's put forward the report that's now shown that the RAF is not viable within the parameters, and those parameters are ones that were well set early on in the piece, that there be no net detrimental effect on the RAF on council rates, which I think has been adhered to quite strictly, which is good, and also the fact that the only site that was really considered was to be the Collier Park Golf Course, which was not an intentional thing from way back when the federal member got the funds. Steve Irons did not make that a requirement, but it was a choice of council to choose the RAF to be at Collier Park. I would like to simply say that I thank all councillors, not just the ones that have voted particular ways. I'd like to thank all councillors for the time and effort that you put into this item especially. It has been, over the years, sometimes very heart-rending, some of the comments that have been made and personal attacks that have been made, and sometimes extremely challenging approach, even within the meeting itself. You know, you've been put under a lot of pressure, and I admire you for the amount of work that you put in, all of you. And I think that the vote tonight will go the sensible way. Sometimes the councillors have been asked to urge to vote in the absence of important, adequate factual information. And I refer back to the business case that was 2019 version anyway. When I asked about what were the risk factors that were going to be considered about the project, was there any sensitivity analysis to be done? I was given the answer, basically, that's all redacted. Councillors know about it, you don't need to know. That was not a good situation. There was too much considered commercial in confidence that was redacted, and that got up our noses, I can assure you. We wanted to be involved in the risk analysis and the facts that could be checked. So I admire the fact that this report that's been put in front of you today has no major redactions. I don't think there's anything that's substantial in the total report. And so we can actually assess this and come along to a meeting fairly well equipped to say, yes, please go ahead, put this project to bed. You've given a lot of effort, but thank you again.
Thank you very much for your deputation. Mr Mitchell. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to ask any questions of Mr Mitchell this evening? No. Thank you, Mr Mitchell. We'll now pause just for a moment so that governance can reconnect to Councillor Quidden. Folks, I did say no more interruptions from the gallery. I meant it. Thank you.
Hi, you've called Glenn. I'm on the phone at the moment. If you leave a message, I'll give you a...
All right, we might try that again.
Hello?
Hello, Councillor Quidland. Can you hear me okay?
I certainly can.
Excellent. All right, we've just had a deputation from Mr Robert Mitchell. We're now moving on to our next deputation from Mr George Watts. I'd like to invite Mr Watts to the microphone. Welcome, and we look forward to your deputation.
Good evening, and thank you for this opportunity to talk. So tonight's decision, if the officer's recommendation is followed, could be viewed a few ways. It's a big if, because I think, my count, that would be maybe the second time council has gone with officer recommendation on this project. Could be wrong, it might be three. But the way I see it, there's three ways of responding to it. It'd be like, oh, well, the RAF's dead, state government, all your fault, didn't provide us any money. Two, see, told you so, business case never stood up. Oh, well done, guys, well done, well done. Or three, council dysfunction and indecision has led us to this point. So we've had a couple of deputations so far. Someone said, oh, you know, but it's the timing. It's the timing. And also another one said, oh, you know, the business case, it's all about the assumptions. That business case also had assumptions of decision-making being done. So the timing is what it was all about. So what was almost 2 years ago, the business case stacked up. But now we're in a situation where we've got different economic circumstances. So just talking through the timeline here. So the federal announcement was in April 2019, business case November 2020, and that was approved. So the first delay was August 2021. That was when we were supposed to start concept and schematic design. So after that stage, we'd have a pretty good idea of how much this thing was going to cost. But no, don't start that. December 2021, further delay. No, not going to appoint a project manager. June 2022, again, let's not appoint a project manager. So now we're definitely in breach of $20 million as well. Let's throw in September 2022, where someone said the council has been operating with integrity and fortitude. Let's reject a petition. Why not? Hasn't been done before in metropolitan local government. Let's have a crack at that. November 2022, we've got to a staged approach. Cool, let's go forward with that. So now we're in March 2023. So we're talking 2 years. 2 years for the economic circumstances to change. But you might go, oh, hang on, George, hang on. This, you know, the stage approach was the key here. It was too expensive for before. Yeah, sure. But if we'd done schematic design when the assumed decision was going to be made, we would have got to that stage earlier and we wouldn't be in the circumstances where we are today. Also, if you want further evidence of indecision and dysfunction, December 21st, 2022, Department of Local Government tapping City of South Perth on the shoulder, going, yeah, here's a little letter. Don't know the details of it, but it's referred to by Minister Carey as dysfunction. He's also on the record saying it is important for local governments to avoid dysfunction because it was the ratepayers who were losers when it occurred. And who loses out here if this recommendation is followed? The community. And so for those that still want to blame the state government for not ponying up the money, I mean, come on, really? Would you get into bed with someone that hasn't made these decisions with such an important investment? And what do we do now? Right? So if this officer recommendation goes forward, what are we doing? We've got George Burnett Leisure Centre, not fit for purpose, bleeding money. We've got Collier Park Golf Course, needs upgrading, needs rebuilding. What are we going to do there? Is there still a need for aquatic facilities? That hasn't gone away. It's been 60 years in the making, there's still the need there. And we've got a dying need for basketball courts too. That cost isn't going to go away. If you want to look at a referendum, a recent by-election, 70% of votes were for candidates that wanted the RAF where it is now. So the need is there, the want is there, that's what the community is expecting. So council's job is to make decisions for the future. And Councillor Steve Russell on Tuesday, just gone, has said it's all about the decision-making process you guys are faced with is intergenerational decisions, and this is one of them. So I don't know how many years a generation is, but 60 years ago. So we're looking at what, third generation kicking the can down the road now? And is this a precedent now being set for all council assets that they all need to pay for themselves? We're expecting libraries to pay for themselves, community buildings, the foreshore, and that's an asset, doesn't pay any spending of money. What are we doing with it? Keeping rates low is one thing, but getting no value for them, that's what we want. People want value for their rates. And abandoning the project now, we're not going back to square one, we're going back to square minus $20 million. So what could be done here? So what I'm suggesting and basically pleading the council to do is allow the city to keep exploring options. Remove the restriction of the project retaining a profit to the city. And now with the findings of this recent report, go back to state government, because the last time Templeman responded, it was, no, we're not going to contribute to a commercial project that feeds money back to the council. So now, as it's in line with other aquatic facilities in the metropolitan area, maybe they'll have a different view. So I'd like to thank you all for listening to me, and I hope that the RAF dream is still alive and something can be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Watts. Councillors, do we have any questions for Mr Watts this evening? Councillor Cridland?
No questions from me.
No. Thank you for your deputation, Mr Watts. I'd now like to invite, please, both sides, no interruptions from the gallery. Thank you. I'd now like to invite Vicky Redden of South Perth, who is speaking for the officer recommendation at item 7.0.1. Welcome, Ms Redden. The microphone is yours.
Hello everyone, and thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to speak on item 7.0.1. I'm speaking on behalf of the South Perth Peninsula Action Group, and I also want to thank all of you for the amount of effort and time and effort that you've put into all the workshops and on this RAF. But after reading the attached reports, we also support the officer's recommendation to not proceed with the RAF project. Up until now, we've always been essentially on the fence. We've never given an opinion either way, because there were always too many unanswered questions, too much data that wasn't there, and nothing that we could validly make our opinion on. For years, we heard council staff and consultants insist that it would all be okay. Hold the faith. The costs will not blow out, the money will appear. We heard sad tales of kids not being missing out on swimming lessons and not having anywhere to play. It was like if everyone wished hard enough, it would just magically happen. But it doesn't work like that. Somebody has to pay for it. And without the state government contributing to this project, it was never going to happen. Their support for our community has been extremely disappointing. Zilch, naught, nulla. Apart from ramming in high density and increasing the population. But anybody who runs a business, anyone who's bought a house or bought a car knows that you have to limit your wishes to match your budget. The bank is not going to give you a $500,000 loan because one day your auntie might give you a large gift. We all hoped the money would appear, but in the end, the officers and the professional consultants have said this project, even in a staged version, is not viable. There is not enough money and the project losses are too great. For months, we heard those who are super supportive of the RAF say, listen to the officers, listen to the professionals. Well, we are. We all have to listen and we all have to read these findings. I'm sure there are many residents who love the idea of a community swimming pool. Not many wouldn't say it's a good idea. And when the glossy brochures of an indoor-outdoor pools, gym and the spa came out, it was easy to see how many South Perth families would get excited. But how many residents actually responded to the survey for the RAF? We have around 45,000 residents in South Perth, just counting those of voting age. We have a potential response to a survey, even if you say on the low end, 15,000 families or couples. Initially, there were 1,641 responses to a very broad set of questions about lifestyle and health. Based on the responses, the concluding statement said that the majority, 87.2, agreed they would likely use the RAF if it was built. More importantly, that conclusion did not infer that 87% were totally supportive, no matter what, just that if it was built, they might use it. More and more concerns were raised, and little specific data was released to allay any of those fears. Later on, when the business plan was released, feedback elicited just 47 replies. Think about that. 47 replies from 15,000 households. Of those 47 responses, 29 were counted as in favour, 14 were not in favour, and 4 didn't state an opinion. The very low number of returns is an indication of interest in itself, not in the positive. In fact, the low number is not a valid response. Based on the number of ratepayers, the feedback was not statistically valid, and serious strategic decisions should never have been made on invalid data. It was misleading and a huge overreach to state or infer that 62% of all South Perth residents were fully supportive of the RAF. That was what was stated from invalid data. So even though there were 29 supportive responses, greater than the 14 non-supportive, those 29 people make up less than 0.1% of our population of South Perth. It is not ethical to allow people's innocent or conditional comments to be hijacked to conclude that feedback on the business plan demonstrates strong community support. It didn't, and you just have to look at the data. Our members have been very concerned, as many of the residents are. And one of the things that they were concerned about is that the council essentially became the fan club of the RAF. With all the publicity asking for support for the project, it should have been the role of council and those involved to provide us with open, honest and transparent information so that we can make up our own minds. And it's taken us till now to see that data. The responses to those survey questions could be vastly different if the full financial risks and losses had been disclosed to the recipients. The answer to would you use a climbing wall might be very different if you also knew that your local oval would be sold off or that your rates would increase by 5%. It was reassuring last year to see a reassessment of the RAF and that a staged project was proposed. That showed a lot of common sense. But now, with these latest figures, it could not be clearer that the project is not viable. So yes, it is time to reevaluate, time to look at other options. Because no matter how fast the little boy runs along the beach with his kite, if the wind isn't blowing, if the energy isn't there, it's not going to fly, no matter how hard he wishes. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your deputation, Ms Redden. Councillors, does anyone have any questions for Ms Redden this evening? Councillor Cridland?
Not from me, thank you.
No. Thank you for your deputation, Ms Redden. We now move on to item 7, which is the special council meeting agenda item 7.0.1, recreation and aquatic facility. I am aware that Councillor Worland has an alternative motion. Councillor Worland, would you like to read the text of your alternative motion? And then we'll see if there's a seconder.
Thank you, Mayor. The alternative motion is that Council 1 notes the officer report and in particular highlights that A, the advice and information used to prepare the 2020 RAF business case documents were reflective of the circumstances at that time, and B, the combined impact of a rapid increase in interest rates, capital funding shortfall and delays to the RAF project since 2020 have contributed to the city's assessment that RAF Stage 1 is no longer viable. 2, notes A, that the original funding proposal from the city to the state government of $20 million, 2021 state government funding proposal, was submitted in October 2021. B, Councillor Resolution number 0922/154, item 12.1, notice of motion, Councillor Mary Choi, RAF, the Councillor Choi motion, appearing at item 12.1 of the minutes of the ordinary council meeting dated 27 September 2022, and C, that the letter received from the Honourable David Templeman MLA dated 23 January 2023 in response to the Councillor Choi motion states, the state government has not yet made any final decision on your funding request. 3, requests the Chief Executive Officer write to the Honourable David Templeman MLA and to Mr Jeff Baker MLA, A, to update the state government on the current status of the RAF project, B, to advise that the RAF project is considered unviable and will not proceed unless the current capital shortfall is addressed, and C, to call upon the state government to commit to providing the final $20 million in capital funding necessary to deliver stage 1 of the RAF project and advise the City of South Perth of the state government's decision either prior to or at the same time that the 2023-24 state budget is delivered. And 4, requests the Chief Executive Officer to investigate methods of financing the estimated annual operating deficit of the RAF to be presented to Council at a workshop to be held not later than 31 May 2023.
Thank you, Councillor Worland. I am happy to second that. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not going to use the limited time available to me tonight to retrace and reflect on the journey that has led us to this point this evening. But I do want to outline broadly 2 things. Firstly, that the parameters that were initially set by Council for this project were eminently sensible. They were the right parameters to consider, and for that Council deserves credit. But it's also true that they were, as we have been advised by officers, somewhat narrow and limiting in understanding or exploring alternative ways that we could actually make this project happen, or at least understand what the real impact would be to our community should those other options have been on the table to begin with. And the second reason is because we know that despite some of the assertions that have been made tonight, and I'll come to this shortly, the RAF project in this part of Perth is not a nice to have. It is a need to have. That is underpinned by substantial data from governments, from various not-for-profit agencies that work directly in the space of sporting and recreation infrastructure. And as we know, there is significant expectations on our community to absorb a considerable amount of growth in a reasonably short time frame. And as has been pointed out to many of us over quite a while now, there is already an infrastructure gap there. We know that as we do grow into the future, that infrastructure gap is only going to get larger, and this fits into that. And to that end, I will also make some comments shortly in relation to other decisions that the state government has made both in a capital sense, in a project sense, but also in some of the recommendations that it has adopted and fully supported from its own independent infrastructure advisory body with respect to local sporting, cultural and recreational infrastructure. Mayor, the reason I want to focus on the aquatics component of this project to begin with is because without the aquatics project, there will be no further stages of the RAF. And while I note the officer's recommendation talks about asking the federal government for us to retain the balance of that $5.5 million to use on other projects, I think we can already see from the city's existing infrastructure base that the outcome of that would be another piecemeal and fragmented approach to community facilities in this city, which still would go a long way to not meeting the current demand, let alone the demand that we can reasonably expect into the future. Now, I don't think anyone here would seriously believe that there is an importance to an aquatic facility for the basic skills, but also the therapeutic and health benefits that it actually brings to all segments of our community. Many people told me as I was out door knocking and speaking to literally thousands of people in various modes over the past 1.5 months or so, that, oh, well, I won't use it because I'm of this particular segment of the demographics, but it'll be good for others. And I actually don't agree with that. I actually think everyone benefits from it because we know there are many people in our community who have various forms or needs in relation to rehabilitation from injury and other health benefits that we know things like aqua therapy and hydrotherapy provide, which we know the aquatics component of this project would provide. Indeed, if you look at the census data, and this is very high level, of course, but there is estimated, as at the census night on 2021 in this community, approximately 1,800 people ranging from babies all the way to our most senior and mature of citizens who require some form of assistance through a health condition, disability or communication impairment. To that end, what it says in the Australian Water Safety Strategy of 2023 is that for particularly our older and more senior citizens, that the benefits of an aquatic facility not only refresh the knowledge and their ability to be able to enjoy not just supervised or indoor aquatics, but also other forms of aquatic activity, be they on boats, and I would note, or even swimming at the beach, the river. And I think that's kind of prescient, given that we are actually a community that is bound on three sides of our boundaries by significant bodies of water. But that ultimately the forms of exercise that you can undertake in an aquatic facility are noted as being low impact and therefore are ideal for that particular group in our community. And I know that because I've seen it from my neighbours to my own family and many other people in between. But we also know that aquatic facilities are essential in developing water safety skills for much younger people. And indeed, we know...
Councillor Worland, I'm sorry to interrupt. That's 5 minutes. I'm more than happy to move a motion that you be granted a further 5 minutes.
Sure.
Is anyone seconding that motion? Councillor D'Souza, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes. And Councillor Cridland, how do you vote on a motion that Councillor Worland be granted a further 5 minutes?
I vote yes.
Thank you. That was unanimous, councillors. Thank you. Councillor Worland, sorry to interrupt. You have a further 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Council. We know, for example, that it is an essential life skill in this country to be able to swim and understand water safety. So to that end, knowing that there is combined at the census date approximately 5,300 school students, both primary and secondary, in this community, that seems pretty fundamental to me. And indeed, the National Drowning Report in 2022 makes this point, and in addition to that, calls very specifically for investment in community infrastructure, which allows for those skills to be developed at a very early age and for the retention of that knowledge as people grow up. So that brings me to other decisions or other projects on the radar which are similar to this. And in particular, I note the proposal at Ellenbrook, which some may be familiar with. It is, from an aquatic perspective, substantially similar, if not identical, to what we have proposed on phase 1 here. And I note that just over a month ago, the Minister for Planning, Transport and Ports, the Honourable Rita Saffioti MLA, who was also the local member for that electorate, was very keen to see that community proceed with the Aquatic Centre at Ellenbrook. Indeed, noted the significant contribution that the state government was making towards that facility. I think that's worth noting, that we are not alone. There are other communities in a similar predicament to us who are receiving that government assistance from the state government. And as we head into budget season, I think it is only fair and appropriate that we make that final request to the state government for the capital funding towards RAF Phase 1, so that we have a full analysis available to us as to whether or not we can proceed with this project. Further to that, in its recent state infrastructure strategy, Infrastructure WA recommended at recommendation 87 that there was, among other things, consideration given to regional plans for infrastructure in the sporting world or sporting space where it is known there is a clear need. Now, I don't think anyone disputes that there has been a very well documented and understood need for indoor courts in this area. And as I said before, without RAF Phase 1, we will not get RAF Phase 2. And so therefore, it does come back to why it is important we seek that. Fundamentally, though, this does go to a question of what is the role of government? And I don't think it is unreasonable. I mean, I like to say that and like to consider myself as being a reasonably limited government type of person. But given the parameters we now face, given what we know is already there from a demand perspective, given what we know about that demand in future, it is only fair that we open the parameters so that we can understand what the full options are available to council to see whether this project can be delivered in different ways so that we can make a fully informed decision. I think we all know that this is a watershed moment. If we decide tonight to go with the officer's recommendation, that will be the end of it. And I'm not hopeful that the outcomes that will come from that will actually allow for a better infrastructure perspective or situation for the city or its ratepayers. It is a bit akin, we keep hearing the George Burnett example cited, it is a bit akin to thinking that we should have rebuilt Subiaco Oval at Kitchener Park rather than build a brand new facility up the stadium. I don't think any more that people would seriously think building it at Kitchener Park was the right call. And I don't think we're in a too dissimilar position. So I would therefore wrap up this part.
Sorry, Councillor Wallen. Ms Brooke, nobody interrupted you during your deputation. Please show similar courtesy to the Speaker. Councillor Wallen, please continue.
Thank you, Mayor. In order to make a very important decision that, as we've heard tonight, will be an intergenerational one, this will have consequences, we need to have the full information in front of us. The officers have done a fantastic job at giving a high-level idea of what the potential impact would be on the operating side of things. I think so that we can have an honest conversation with our community about what that impact would look like and how then that would be tolerated or otherwise is necessary. That's why I'm moving this motion, and that's why I seek council's support for it.
Thank you, Councillor Borland. I've seconded that motion, so I'll say a few words in support. Councillors, I do find the circumstances that we presently find ourselves in to be bitterly disappointing. I spend a lot of my time meeting with and listening to our community, and I truly do believe that the number one outcome that our community wishes to see from their council is the delivery of the recreation and aquatic facility. In September of last year, the city received a petition with the largest number of verified signatures in the city's history, expressing our community's strong and overwhelming support for the RAF. At the recent Como ward by-election earlier this year, our residents didn't just elect Councillor Warland, they also sent this council a loud and clear message. We want the RAF. And it now looks as though our community will not see that very important and much needed facility delivered. There may be some people who will say that the project never stacked up. Those people, with all due respect, they would be wrong. The officer report is quite clear. The combined impact of a rapid increase in interest rates, particularly over the last 10 months, a capital funding shortfall, and yes, delays to the RAF project since 2020 have rendered a viable project unviable. The officer report is well written and it's comprehensive, and I do thank the city officers for their diligence. Yes, the officer recommendation is heartbreaking, but I do understand why the city officers have advised, quite rightly, that the proposed RAF Stage 1 is not viable within the framework previously specified by Council and in the current economic conditions. What was possible in 2020, in 2021, and during part of 2022 is no longer possible. The previous framework set by Council is no longer feasible. The increase in interest rates over the last 10 months has created a radically different economic environment. And that is the crux of the matter, councillors. The rise in interest rates and therefore the cost of debt. The interest that the city would have to pay on any borrowings to fund this project has nearly tripled within 10 months. That, more so than any other factor, is what is rendering the project financially unviable under the framework previously set by Council. So I see two key challenges that this Council must overcome in the short term. There are other challenges, but these are the immediate challenges to be overcome. This project needs another $20 million in external capital. That is the first and the most significant challenge that we must overcome. $20 million is exactly the amount that the city sought from the state government by a funding proposal in October 2021. The state government has not yet made a decision on that funding proposal. I don't mean to be giving our community false hope here. The city's funding proposal for the RAF has been with the state government for 15, 16 months now. The most recent correspondence that we've received from the Minister in January says that the state government has not yet made any final decision on our funding request. Some people might say that after this amount of time, we ought to be reading between the lines. I don't accept that. I think that if the state government had genuinely decided not to support the RAF, they would have told us that. I accept that if the state government says that they haven't made a decision, then they haven't made a decision. But now, this council and this community needs a firm and final decision. Continuing to wait for an answer is no longer an option. Circumstances have changed, as the officers have quite rightly identified, and we should be open and transparent with the state government about those changed circumstances in the same way that we would want the state government to be open and transparent with us. I am going to interrupt myself because that's almost 5 minutes and I think we might have lost Councillor Cridland. Is that correct? Yes, we have. Okay. So, first of all, I'm going to pause here.
I'm on the phone at the moment. If you leave a message, I'll...
All right, we might try that again, and then when Councillor Cridland is back online, I'll see if anyone's willing to move a motion to grant me a further 5 minutes.
Hello again.
Welcome back, Councillor Cridland. So we've just gotten to the 5-minute mark of my reasons for seconding Councillor Worland's alternative motion. I'm about to ask the council if there's anyone willing to move a motion that I be granted an extra 5 minutes. Councillor Worland. Go ahead, Councillor Cridland.
I was going to say I'm happy to move or second that.
All right, I think Councillor Worland was first, seconded by Councillor Cridland. Councillors, please cast your votes. And how do you vote on that one, Councillor Cridland?
I vote yes.
Thank you. So that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors, for the indulgence. I shouldn't take the full 5 minutes remaining to me. So, I was just said that I'd want the state government to be open and transparent with us. We should be open and transparent with them about the change in circumstances and where the RAF project presently is. We know that in the absence of a decision by the state government, we can't move ahead with this project. We will have to give back most, if not all, of the $20 million grant from the federal government. In the absence of a decision by the state government, this council, I think, will be forced to pull the plug on the RAF. I think if we do that, our community will not see a public aquatic facility in their district for decades. Under the circumstances, our community would expect us to seek a firm and final decision from the state government before this council makes the very consequential decision to pull the plug on this project. Voting against this alternative motion would be voting against denying ourselves crucial and highly relevant information before making a very important decision from which there can be no return. So that's the first challenge we're facing. The second challenge that we must overcome is this council's propensity for delay on important project decisions. This council has twice chosen not to appoint a project manager for the RAF when asked to do so by the city administration. Those decisions put us in breach of the federal government's $20 million funding agreement. We will still need to appoint a project manager if the RAF project is to continue. There's a very easy illustration of the risk that council delay represents, and it can be found at page 7 of the officer report. Page 7 states that RAF Stage 1 assumes a construction date of May 2024. For every month of delay beyond May 2024, total project costs increase by an estimated $300,000. Councillors, if it wasn't already obvious, a failure on our part to make timely and sensible decisions relating to this project can have enormous consequences for the community we serve. Council delay or indecision is a massive governance and project risk that we must overcome. Those are the major challenges facing us, councillors. They're not small challenges, and success is not guaranteed. The second challenge that I've mentioned is within our power to overcome, but we are dependent on the state government for the first. Irrespective of how we vote tonight, success is not guaranteed. But the RAF project is the #1 outcome that our community wants from us. Our community has spoken. Our role as a council is to listen and to act. There is very little marginal cost associated with the alternative motion. If there's even a slim chance that the state government is willing to help make this project a reality, then that is a chance that I'm willing to take for our community. The hour might be dark, but there is still hope. By contrast, if we vote to kill this project tonight, I don't think we will see another federal or state government grant of comparable size for the foreseeable future. If we vote to kill this project tonight, we will have to explain to our community why we weren't willing to put all of our cards on the table and ask the state government to help deliver the #1 project that our community is calling for. If we vote to kill the project tonight, I do not think that this city will see a public aquatic facility for decades. I recently spoke with a member of our community who recalled organising a walkathon to raise money for an aquatic centre. That was in the 1960s. She is still waiting. The RAF is our last, best hope to meet this community need. Councillor Worland is willing to fight for this project, and so am I. I support this alternative motion. This is a very important vote, councillors. It is one of the most consequential decisions that any of us will ever make. Our community is watching, and they will not forget what we do here tonight. Thank you. No, I've got to be fair and even. No interruptions from the gallery on either side. But well, yeah. Now, is there anyone who wishes to speak against Councillor Worland's alternative motion? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wish to speak against the item, and in doing so, I wish to foreshadow the City Officer's recommendation. Okay.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't support this motion for many reasons. Firstly, I do disagree with this second point, which notes that the delays in the RAF project have occurred since 2020. I don't see these being delays. I actually see this being good governance being conducted by the elected members. And for such a large mega project, which is complicated and requires a lot of input and a lot of community support, it took a lot of time to actually get to this point. There were no delays with regard to councillors not making decisions, being indecisive. The delays were pretty much in the structure of what we were trying to achieve and what we had actually agreed to, as an outcome. In November 2020, Council unanimously endorsed the RAF business case, the project definition plan and operational feasibility, and a city contribution of $20 million to match the federal government funding was endorsed. Council supported the RAF unanimously on this basis. And this included it being financially self-sustaining, and it would not result in an increase in rates. To be financially self-sustaining, it needed to be inclusive of the cost of debt and the sinking fund contributions. The RAF must incorporate a range of revenue positive elements in order to offset the operating losses expected from other elements of the RAF. This was the mandate. This is what we were trying to achieve. The business case then assumed an $80 million funding package with an annual return that covered the cost of debt and sinking fund contributions. $60 million of external funding was required to deliver this proposal. That's what the elected members had agreed to work towards to make this financially feasible. It was confirmed that if the additional external funding was not secured, then the proposed business case would not proceed as contemplated, and that a scaled-down version with a reduced funding package might be capable of being self-sustaining. And that's why we're here tonight. We're looking at stage one, and stage one has come back as not being financially self-sustaining. The experts have actually provided their report. State funding has been quite clear. As COSPRA have advised at the electors meeting in 2021, the minister at the time, Mr. McMurray, had actually made it quite clear that state funding was not available in the current year or in the out years. This was reiterated again through COSPRA providing additional information, and it was echoed by the Honourable Kate Doust. That was 2 years ago. Councillor Choi's motion put forward actually resulted in us actually having a clearer determination as to where the state was going. And it was relatively clear as well. So the recent letter from the Honourable David Templeman, Minister for Sport and Recreation, states, "I also note that the proposed local government contribution to the project was lower than could reasonably be expected. Given that the project will primarily benefit the city's residents rather than the wider community, there are also potential commercial benefits to the city." It's really quite important to note that the state's position hasn't changed in this, and the requirement for us to actually make this financially feasible meant that it needed to be funded. And we're still not there today. Over the past 2 years, significant value engineering has been lost, and that has resulted in delaying progressing alternative options whilst we're waiting for outcomes on the possibility of state or investor funding. The valuation analysis of this delay has reduced the value of money over the last 2 years. It's not through the delay of elected members, it's circumstantial of economic times. If we look at the WA building construction industry...
Councillor Brenda Abrandis, that's 5 minutes. I'm happy to move a motion that you be granted a further 5 minutes. Is there a seconder? Councillor Warland, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes. And Councillor Cridland, how would you like to vote on a motion that Councillor Brenda Abrandis be granted a further 5 minutes?
I vote yes.
Thank you. That was unanimous. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, please continue. You have a further 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The overall West Australian Building Construction Index from Q4 2020 to Q2 2022 has increased approximately 30%. We're all aware of construction industry cost escalation. We all know someone who is waiting for a property to be developed. We're all aware of people who have had increases with regard to their construction costs. And likewise, the manufacturing division of the CPI increase for structural steel fabrication over this same period has increased by 21 and 40% over the 2-year period through to 2022. So significant costs we were aware of. As elected members, we needed to address both the significant costs, and we asked the administration late last year to actually consider a scale back proposal that could possibly accommodate the construction of a reduced stage 1 in the vicinity of $45 to $60 million. And we didn't even get there. We're still looking at a $70 to $75 million project. The risk rating on delivering the RAF under the existing circumstances is high, reflecting a capital shortfall of at least $20 million. That was the prospect that the funding was originally targeted to achieve. But now, as I said, it's 75 million. So we've got a shortfall right now of about $50 million. The city has limited financial capacity to withstand any unforeseen costs that might arise during the design and construction phases. This includes limitations on estimating costs associated with modifying existing infrastructure on former landfill sites, and it provides a lower level of confidence in the estimated capital costs. In other words, maybe the $75 million could actually be much higher. The interest rate that has been used in this calculation is the West Australian Treasury Corporation 5.5% rate, and that is significant with regard to borrowings. That drives any potential investor or operator's rate of return higher. If the city was to borrow, say, $30 million over 20 years at that rate, the annual repayments that the city would need to make annually would be $2.5 million. And that equates to about 6.8% of our current gross rates revenue. The repayment of borrowings is a separate consideration with regard to the operating losses. And this report indicates that there is the potential to have an operating annual loss of 1 to 1.5% in addition to the repayment of borrowings. Now, it was noted that this is a failure on our part and that this is actually a massive governance project risk. This is actually not a failure at all. In fact, I think council have actually worked quite well and have worked quite hard and had to endure quite a lot in order to maintain their diligence in ensuring we actually do get to the right outcome. So it's far from a failure. In fact, it reflects quite well upon the elected members that we are here tonight and we've actually worked quite hard at this to get to this point. But unfortunately, we don't have the funding. Unfortunately, costs have escalated and the interest rate that we may need to borrow at would be quite high. So
60 seconds remaining, Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So for these reasons, I do not support this alternative motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, thank you. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in favour of the alternative motion who hasn't spoken? Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a question to the city, please. I see that Councillor Wallen is requesting the CEO to investigate methods of financing the estimated annual operating deficit of the RAF, which I believe would be about $2 to $2.5 million at today's present value per annum over 20 years. This question is akin to the perennial question that we always ask the city, where in order not to increase rates, then savings need to be found elsewhere, either in the operating or capital budget. So in order to not increase the rate range over and above what we are set within the long-term financial plan, can the city give any indication of any easy savings that could be had to make up, say, $1 to $2.5 million per annum?
Who should I send that to? Mr Adams? Councillor Brenda Brandis, you still have your microphone on.
So the simple answer to that is no. We've already gone through some significant cost-saving exercises and without impacting on service delivery in other areas, it would be quite difficult to find the amount of savings that would be required to fund the operating deficit. And the operating deficit we were projecting would be in the vicinity of $1 to $1.5 million. That's not taking into account any additional borrowings that are outside of the business case. You'll note what the parameters are in the business case as to what's modelled there, but just in terms of that $1 to $1.5 million in terms of operating deficit, 1% of rates equates to about $400,000. So.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillor Navard, a question, or you wish to speak?
I have some questions that I'd like to ask. I think that's much.
Far away.
In 2019, the 4 WA local government projects to receive funds from the Female Facilities and Water Safety Stream, FFWSS, from the federal government, known commonly as sports shorts, were Ellenbrook, Mandurah, Alkimos and South Perth. Ellenbrook Recreation and Aquatics Centre is in the City of Swan, and the original project was estimated to cost $63.5 million, including a federal...
Councillor Navard, questions do have to be short and succinct. Can we get to the actual question, please? You're more than welcome to speak and make a statement while you're actually speaking to the motion, but questions must be short and succinct.
All right. In order for our community to understand an aquatic project that was funded under the same federal program as the RAF, is the City of South Perth able to assist our community in understanding the funding source for the Ellenbrook project, which makes no reference to a City of Swan contribution and appears to reference a total of $30 million from federal sources. And one of the issues at present is...
Councillor Navard, please ask your question.
Right, I've asked it. Thank you.
That was your question?
Well, I've just read it out.
All right.
Want me to do it again?
No, I'm sure that'll be fine, not unless the officers want it repeated. Ms Amprimo, shall I send that your way?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. According to the most recent long-term financial plan for the City of Swan, $32.3 million of the borrowings has been allocated to the Ellenbrook Leisure Centre. However, according to the City of Swan's website in March 2022, due to rising construction costs and the withdrawal of a second builder from delivery of an approved construction tender, the City paused development of the project and initiated a review. The City of Swan website states it will present a report to Council in early 2023 seeking to include a proposed change of location and offer of additional state support into the review of the aquatic facility strategy.
Thank you, Ms Amprimo. And just a reminder to all councillors, the standing orders are quite clear. Questions are to be concise and succinct. Councillor Navard, do you have another question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The second question relates to Mandurah, which was also funded under the same arrangement. And they received $7 million of federal funding and $10 million from the state. Their project is very close to completion or has been completed. And my question for this one was the federal and state contributions for the Mandurah Aquatic Facility were comparatively modest, and the state contribution was greater, but also formed part of a specific plan for Peel project budget. Would these factors have contributed to the City of Mandurah's success in gaining a greater sum from state funding as compared with their federal contribution?
Ms Ampremo.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The City does not have any knowledge of why the City of Mandurah was successful in receiving state government funding, therefore is unable to provide any further comment.
Okay. And I have a further question. The Alkimos Aquatic and Recreation Centre from the City of Wanneroo has a shortfall at present of $30 million. So it had various discussions about federal funding on their webpage, and
Just the question, please, Councillor Navard.
okay. And yes, they indicated that they were still $30 million short. So from the city's knowledge of other local government aquatic projects in WA, is the city able to clarify whether Wanneroo received a federal offer of $20 million and, like South Perth, have so far received a progress payment of $5 million, because their numbers didn't stack up at all?
Ms Ampremo.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's important to note that these types of funding agreements take some time to finalise. For example, the election commitment for the RAF was announced in April 2019, and the City signed the agreement with the Commonwealth in April 2021. City officers have confirmed with the City of Wanneroo that they are currently in negotiations about the $25 million election commitment for the Alkimos Arc project.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Ampremo. Was that all of your questions, Councillor Navard? All right. Is there anyone, Councillor Brenda Brandis, do you have a question? Because you have spoken.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I have several questions.
Fire away, but as I say, please keep them concise and succinct.
Thank you. Questions for the administration. The alternative motion requests the state government be provided with a status update to advise the project is unviable due to a capital shortfall, and call upon the state government to commit to $20 million capital funding. Please advise if approaching state government again is necessary, given the ongoing communication for the past 3 years, including the Treasury business case being provided in and the last formal written request in late 2022.
Who should I send that to? Mr Bradford?
Thanks, Councillor. As we previously stated, the City at an officer level has been in contact with officers in Minister Templeman's office to ensure that the office is fully aware of where we're at with the project and the need for state funding contribution. And that was focused on stage 2 as in our most recent correspondence. Notwithstanding the comment in the 23 January letter from Minister Templeman that the state government has not yet made a final decision on your funding request, that's a quote. Look, there's nothing we've got that indicates that we're going to get a different outcome, but the reality is they haven't formally responded.
All right, thank you, Mr Bradford. My next question is, has there been any indication the state will show a change of willingness to support this since the letter received from the Minister for Culture and Arts, Sports and Recreation, International Education and Heritage from the Honourable David Templeman, MLA?
Mr Bradford?
They already answered that, no.
Right, thank you. The next question is if the state provided funding of $20 million, this project will still be unfunded in excess of $30 million. Do you consider it financially viable to borrow in excess of $30 million and to support or subsidise anticipated operating losses?
Mr Bradford?
I'm not sure how you get to those numbers. The City has not requested $20 million from the state for stage 1. Current committed funds for the project are $20 million from the federal government, $20 million from the City. That's been modelled in the documents you've got in front of you, at $10 million from reserve and $10 million of borrowing, noting that no decision on the actual arrangements are made. $2 to $3 million from Curtin, and we anticipate $10 million from the operator. That's been confirmed through our most recent market soundings. That gives a total of $53 million. So given that our consultants estimated the project cost at about 62.3, our view is a proper project budget in the order of 70 to 75 million would be appropriate. That leaves a shortfall by my calculation of 17 to $22 million.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. Just a follow-up from that question. With regard to the city's contribution, a determination as to the source of the funding hasn't actually been made at this point in time. So could that be possibly borrowed as well and add to the 17 million?
Mr. Bradford?
That's exactly what's in the business case.
Thank you. My next question is, given the Commonwealth funding have not yet approved our stage 1 proposal, do you consider this request this late would be accommodated for, given time on this grant application is running out? And I'm referring to this alternative motion tonight.
Mr. Bradford?
The contract that we have with the federal government has been very clear about the milestones. And in fact, we've been in breach of that contract since September last year, I think, or thereabouts. Notwithstanding that, at an officer level and departmental level, the Commonwealth has indicated a strong willingness to accommodate changes in circumstances. And so they've informally provided us advice around the change of scope. But if there were further changes, we wouldn't know until we asked them.
Thank you, Mr. Bradford. And my last question. The fourth point of the alternative motion requests an investigation of methods of financing the estimated operating deficit. And this to be presented to Council by 31st of May 2023. Can you please advise if you believe you have exhausted your review of the financial methods available to the City for this project at this stage, and as was requested by Council to be undertaken as part of the stage 1 review?
Should I send that to Mr. Adams? Yes.
So we believe we've pursued all available funding avenues for this project. As noted, well, I would make the point that we would never advise Council to borrow to fund an operating deficit. To fund the capital costs, yes, we'd advise that that's a prudent strategy, but not for funding operating deficits. So, as noted in the Council report, the operating deficit of around 1 to 1.5 million, you would have to cover that by either other sources of revenue, of which we have very few, rates revenue, of which we've said, you know, that would be 3 to 4% increase in rates, or savings in other areas, i.e. not providing services that we already do. So I guess we're fairly limited in how we could fund an ongoing operating deficit.
Thank you, Mr. Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Adams and Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes, Councillor Choi, speaking for or against?
A couple of questions, please, Mr. Mayor.
Fire away.
Thank you. So in terms of some recent observations since the current report and recommendations were released, it appears that some sections of the community believe the City had the money to start with for this project in its all or nothing original form back in 2020. And if we had just commenced building back in 2020, when the borrowing rate was said to be around 1.8% on a fixed term for 20 years, as noted on page 7 of the officer's report and tonight's agenda, we would have been okay. I just want to confirm that the City was not ready to commence developing the RAF simultaneously off the back of endorsing the project via the business case, which did not occur until late 2020, November, and there was certainly no consideration or recommendation to Council to borrow $20 million from the bank back in 2020, and in fact there has been no consideration or recommendation to Council to borrow any money for the RAF to date at all.
Shall I send that to Mr. Bradford, Ms. Amprima, or Mr. Adams?
I'm not sure exactly what the question is. Could you just confirm that, please?
As concisely as possible, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and CEO Bradford. I did run this by Director Adams the other evening. I'm not sure if he recalls that now. Thank you.
Mr Adams?
So I understand the gist of your question to be, was there a point at which we were ready to borrow $20 million at 1.8%? And look, it's hard to deal in hypotheticals. I don't know when, if decisions had been made differently, it's hard to know when we would have borrowed and what the rate would have been at the particular time when we're ready to borrow. All we can operate on is the fact that we would only borrow normally when we needed to have those funds available to pay for the construction. And so we're looking at what the rates are now and what the rates are likely to be when we would need to borrow for the project, and they're no longer 1.8% as they were back then. We're up at around 5.5% at the moment.
Thank you, Mr Adams. And councillors, once again, questions must be concise, they must be succinct. If they're several sentences long, it's often difficult for our officers to know exactly what it is they're supposed to be answering. So just a friendly reminder. Councillor Choi?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do have another question. I didn't believe my previous question was that long, but in any case, under Standing Orders 7.42 on page 24 of the Standing Orders, it does state that if it's necessary to explain a question, it may be acceptable to make that preamble a little bit longer if
Councillor Choi, the standing orders are clear. Please proceed with your question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So in terms of a potential increase in the rates revenue, as also noted on pages 7, 12 and 13 of the officer's report in tonight's agenda, I just want to clarify that the 3% rate increase per annum to help fund the potential operating deficit for the RAF is firstly an average minimum rate, i.e. it could be more but unlikely less. And secondly, that this increase is an addition or on top of any normal or expected rate increase to cover business as usual operations and services to the community. Noting last year the rate increase was 4.5% due to the unforeseen economic pressures, which unfortunately appear only set to continue.
Mr Adams, shall I send that your way?
So it's up to council to decide what the rate increase will be, and we haven't decided on anything for the next financial year yet. We're going through that budget process now. All I can say is that if you're looking at funding something from rates, 1% increase, we have a rates base of about $40 million, so 1% increase in rates across the whole rates portfolio is $400,000. So obviously we're in times of inflationary pressures, and so all of our costs are going up. So yes, we have to fund those cost increases to deliver the services that we're continuing to deliver. So if we had another additional 1 to 1.5 million that we'd have to fund on top of that, then yes, we'd have to look at an additional rate increase over and above what would normally be the case.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Any further questions, Councillor Choi?
No, that's all of my questions. I would like to speak to the alternative motion now, if I may.
All right, you're speaking for or against?
Against, thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So first of all, I think it is very good of Councillor Wallen to come up with and bring an alternative motion to the table tonight, being his very first. Well done. Since getting the ball rolling on the RAF and delivering this project appears to have been his primary election commitment only some weeks ago during the Como by-election. The subsequent councillor briefings and the report and recommendation in front of us must have certainly been daunting and come as quite as a shock. However, whilst I commend Councillor Wallen's enthusiasm and acknowledge the uncomfortable situation he may appear to be in now, it'll pass, I'm sure, I don't understand how writing to the same people in the state government with a written response from one of whom, being the Minister responsible for Sport and Recreation, the Honourable David Templeman MLA, to our last request for support and a funding commitment, Council has only received a month ago, as included at page 99 of the 28 February 2023 Ordinary Council meeting attachments, is really going to help. I'm sure they must understand the situation by now. And whilst I don't disagree that we need increased recreational facilities in the city, it appears that perhaps the funding stakeholders don't. I know it was before Councillor Wallen's time, and I'm not sure if he's reviewed or played back the audio recordings of previous meetings where the RAF appeared as an agenda item, but others of you who were here may recall, as I will do, that I received quite a lot of flack around a similar, more comprehensive motion to seek clarification on the state government's commitment and funding position for the RAF project only last September, when we hadn't heard anything back from them in just shy of a year of submitting the city's Treasury business case for the RAF. But the Council gratefully endorsed that idea after quite some debate, and now that we have a response for which I'm very grateful to the Honourable Minister for finishing us with, I don't think I'm comfortable to support a different motion to ask pretty much the same again of the same Minister, just a month later of receipt of his last letter. Bolstering this concern is the officer's advice at page 8 of their report, where it states that it's unlikely that any significant funding for the RAF is forthcoming in upcoming state government budget cycles. I also note from the CEO's response letter back to the Honourable Minister dated 3rd of February 2023, included at page 101 of the 28th February 2023 Ordinary Council meeting attachments, that he was going to seek another meeting with the Minister at the end of this month. I note at page 15 of the officer's report for this evening's meeting that no response from the Minister's office has been further received to the CEO's letter. And I think the CEO confirmed that this evening. So I gather it's still the status quo as of this meeting. I would therefore like to ask Councillor Walland what he thinks his alternative motion will change. My next point is that I believe the City also made it pretty clear to elected members, and in their 1 November 2022 report for the Special Council meeting on the RAF, and at page 8 of the Officer's report in this evening's agenda, that a state government funding commitment was not required for stage 1, only for stage 2 of the project, although it would have been desirable so that 2 stages could have been delivered together. I'm not sure how it would look, but not very well, I presume, that now only some 4 months later, in accordance with paragraph 3C of Councillor Wallen's alternative motion, all of a sudden we need the state government funding commitment of no less than 20 million to deliver stage 1 of the project too. My next point is that I also don't know what Councillor Walland or anyone else is expecting the City office to pull out of their magician's hat that they haven't tried or thought about doing already. I think they have been very brave in presenting this quite well-balanced report and recommendation to us this evening, and I'm very grateful for their candour and the hard yards put in to come to the clear conclusion that they have. We are always encouraged to, and I believe for the most part we do, listen to the officer's recommendations and take on board their reporting, with only a very good reason to go against it and do something different. I'm not sure Councillor Walland's alternative motion, even with the best intentions in mind, hits the mark in this instance, unfortunately. Nevertheless, to go against the officer report and recommendation on this item at this time will be nothing else like Council has ever done before, I believe. The potential impact is big. I ask my second last point I want to make. I asked Councillor Walland, what else do you want the City to consider? As surely he must have had something in mind when drafting his alternative motion. Councillor Manoel has already raised a motion endorsed by Council last year, seeking for the City to look at how to improve its city efficiencies. And I believe that the City said, and please correct me if I'm wrong, CEO Bradford, that the City is already running a pretty lean ship. And I'm sure that's only increased since, increase in cost due to inflation, etc. So as the only avenues I can think of which maybe hasn't been addressed in the officer's report, or if raised internally was likely dismissed, could include, but it's not strictly limited to, perhaps closing...
Councillor Choi, that is 5 minutes. I will move a motion that you be granted. Oh, but before I do that, we will reconnect to Councillor Cridland, and then I will move a motion that you be granted a further 5 minutes. And we'll see about a seconder.
Hello again.
Welcome back, Councillor Cridland. So we're at the 5 minute mark of Councillor Choi's speech. I'm happy to move a motion should she be granted a further 5 minutes, seconded by Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, please cast your votes. And Councillor Cridland, how would you like to vote on that?
I vote yes.
All right. That was unanimous. Councillor Choi, you have a further 5 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and to the Council's indulgence for this. It is a very important item that we're discussing tonight. As the only avenues I can think of, which maybe hasn't been addressed in the officer's report, or if raised internally was likely dismissed, could include, but not strictly limited to, perhaps closing down community centres and services such as a senior citizen centre, a library, perhaps a community sporting club facility, ceasing plans on other capital works projects such as the endorsed BMX pump track, reducing expenditure on the maintenance of our parks and recreational reserves. Well, we all know how well that went. When that happened previously, I think the number of complaints rose. Not upgrading or replacing ageing playgrounds, and perhaps selling off land that may be considered surplus to needs. I don't know. Just thinking off the top of my head, that could include the Burt Street car park next to us, the land and building in Como where the South Perth Bridge Club currently operate out of, the Collins Street Centre Hall in South Perth where the local playgroup operates from, or even part of the South Perth foreshore maybe. Who knows? I guess everything might be up for consideration if we become that desperate. Maybe the city could consider borrowing its maximum borrowing power, which in turn means no more borrowings for any other project, maybe for several years. I don't know. Rhetorically speaking, is this the kind of thing that Councillor Wallen is envisaging the CEO might come up with to meet the year-on-year estimated annual operating deficit for the RAF? And if so, would this be acceptable to other elected members and, more importantly, the broader community? I know this is all pie-in-the-sky stuff and may not be able to be answered right now, but nevertheless, it could very well be the reality that comes back in any report. And I think any such measures would also take months to progress, not a few extra weeks. And I, for one, would probably not be supportive of such measures without being well briefed beforehand and without extensive community consultation undertaken. Meanwhile, the costs for the project continue to escalate out of anyone's control. Finally, I believe a third cost area concern may have been missed in Councillor Wallen's motion in relation to increased contingencies for the project and any unforeseen costs arising during the design and construction phases, as Councillor Brenda O'Brandis has touched on, which the CT has cited it has limited capacity to withstand, as noted on pages 17 to 18 of the officer's report in tonight's agenda. Perhaps Councillor Wallen would like to add that part to his motion, I'm not sure, for the CEO to contemplate too. Unfortunately, with all these deficiencies, in my opinion, for the reasons provided, it was a good effort and I wanted to, but I'm sorry, but I just can't support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak for the alternative motion who hasn't already spoken? Councillor D'Souza.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, yes, at the November Special Council meeting last year, I was hopeful. I was hopeful that the creative stage model, which seemed to address all of the intractable issues which beleaguered this project from day one, seemed to be addressed and seemed to be what looked like a realistic path forward. I, along with, I think, all of my colleagues, hopefully, I'm not wrong about this, but we left that meeting with a sense of possibility, that we could wrangle some sort of workable solution. In that context, the officer report in front of us makes for sobering reading. It is a frank assessment of the facts of the RAF. So in that light, I do want to thank Ms. M. Primo and Mr. Ball for laying out this frank and fearless advice. No doubt, it would not have been easy to put their recommendation forward, given the city's collective financial and emotional investment in this project for the past 3 years. But nothing can change the economic reality we're in, and the fiscal challenges of the RAF are now clear and out there for all to see. But I also note Councillor Wallen's motion, if accepted, costs us exactly $0 to proceed with. And I'm supporting this for the same reason I supported Councillor Choi's motion last year, in that it is a request to the state government to exhaust all our options. There probably is a better chance than not we might not receive a response, or we might receive a negative response. But I think it represents a final, wholehearted push to realise the project. Now, I don't want our community in any doubt that council, all of us in this room, have made best endeavours to exhaust every last possible avenue to bring this project to fruition. And similar to Councillor Choi, I want to commend Councillor Wallen for putting up a motion like this so early on in his tenure. It isn't an easy job being on council, and to put so, I guess, important emotion so early on wouldn't have been easy. I want to take the approach tonight, which is the same approach I took on Tuesday night, which is for my amendments to the Manning Road LPS rezoning, which is to leave no stone unturned. And it would be remiss of me not to give those amendments a red hot crack. And I think the same sentiment is applicable today. So in that spirit, it might well be a Hail Mary pass, but for one last roll of the dice, I think I'll be supporting Councillor Wallen's motion.
Thank you, Councillor D'Souza. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the alternative motion who hasn't already spoken? Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I wish to speak against the item. With respect to the good intentions of Councillor Wallen's alternative, I believe there's actually no merit to it. It can only work as a starting point if the state government comes to the party with something. However, it simply has shown no interest. The business plan was submitted to the state government in October 2021, and since then we have heard crickets. Nothing formal, nothing informal in terms of a support for a $20 million or even less of funding. In the meantime, however, the state government is proceeding with the state advocated WACA pool, which amazingly is proposed to be funded via the Perth CBD Parking Levy Reserve through a retrospective change in the reserve's rules to allow for such. To this effect, I find Minister Tilperman's statement in his letter to the City item in the February 2023 OCM that the City of South Perth funding request for the project does not fall within the scope of any existing state government support and recreation funding programs to be particularly galling and hypocritical. Perhaps the state government can therefore find some other reserve and retrospectively change its rules to fund the RAF. Perhaps the South Perth train station, upgrades to the Canning Highway, and more importantly, to significantly fund our only public high school, Como Secondary. I'm not holding my breath for any RAF funding, and I don't believe council should either. Therefore, I will not be voting for this alternative. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Councillors, is there anyone who hasn't spoken either for or against the alternative motion who would like to speak? Councillor Navard.
I'll be very brief. Thank you for the wonderful report. It's very clear. Looking at the other projects, Ellenbrook and Alkimos, that is still alive, I can see that both of these have hit further bumps in the road. Now, we have been reminded that delays along the way are going to further increase our costs. And so from that perspective alone, I feel doubly cautious about progressing with the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. I'd call if there's anyone else who wants to speak, but I think there's only one left who hasn't spoken yet. Councillor Cridland, is there anything that you'd like to say?
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. I have dropped out a little bit, so I missed a little bit of Councillor Choi. So, but I think I've heard the rest of the debate. This is a particularly important item. It's been a long time in gestation, certainly longer than an elephant. I think it was, 2017, or 19, when the funds first were promised. We've got a community strategic plan that says we in the community are committed to this. There's no question that there is an absolutely dire need for this in our community. And I'm talking about the recreational facilities. We have some of the poorest facilities of any of the inner suburbs in Perth. All of that is obvious. We've got overwhelming community support for having the facility. Our little children are going to miss out on this. In fact, the little children who first wanted this are now in their 60s and 70s. And if we don't make this project happen, if it is possible to do so, then it won't happen in our lifetime, and almost certainly not in our children's lifetime. After all, who would give us money when we stuff around for 5 years? And in that period, well, I'll change my comment there. There have been delays, significant delays, and it is not correct to say they are not attributable to the council, because they clearly are. There have been a number of recommendations to this council which have been rejected and deferred. As a council, we've voted to breach contracts with the Commonwealth. All of that really bad governance. And in that period, the economic situation has changed. And if you delay things long enough, you wait long enough, things do change. And as a result of that delay by council, the value of that $20 million is reduced substantially by millions. And the cost of our funding has increased by millions. And the amount of funding cost to the contractor has gone up by millions. So yes, that delay has changed what was a clear business plan, that this was a very viable, profit-making project, into now something where it's likely to make a loss. And in that case, it would be just like the libraries. It would just be just like the streets and the street lighting. It would be just like the community centres, the senior centre, Sir James Mitchell Park. And we are not intending to close any of those, because we live in a community and we take in rates and other money so we can provide services to our community. And we look and we work out how we can best spend the money. And even if there is an operating loss, it may well be that this is the best way we can spend our money on providing great facilities for our community where they don't have any. So yes, the recommendation is it's not currently viable given the delay and the costs imposed by the council's delay and by the change in economic conditions. We are now in a dire situation to implement our community strategic plan. But what this motion does is it gives the state government, and I note that Mr. Jeff Baker was there earlier. I don't know if he's still there because I can't see through the telephone. But I know how firmly committed he is as the local member to this project. It gives him more time to work on Templeman, and the state government one last chance to be reasonable. I'm not going to use quite the harsh words of Councillor Russell, but yes, they should come to the party, and these are really desperately needed facilities, and the state government should put in some money, and Jeff Baker will have another short period to work on Templeman. It costs us nothing at all, as Councillor D'Souza said, to just allow the city that one last chance to see if the state government can just be decent and reasonable. So for that reason, I'm going to support this. It costs us nothing unless you really don't want to have that information. And if you want to...
Councillor Cridland, I'm sorry, that is 5 minutes. I will move a motion that you be granted a further 5 minutes, seconded by Councillor Warland. Councillors, please cast your votes. And how do you vote on that, Councillor Cridland?
I'll vote yes.
Very good of you, yes. Waiting on one more vote. And that was unanimous. You do have a further 5 minutes.
Thank you, councillors. It's very late where I am, and I'm sure none of you want me to delay this further, so I'll be brief. So what I'm saying is it costs us nothing to pass this motion. The amount of delay involved in this very short period is nothing in comparison with the delays we've had so far. It will give us more information. Of course, reject this motion if you don't want to have that information, and if you don't want to give the state government one last chance. But if you do, then you'll support this motion. And I ask that you do too. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Councillors, I think all elected members have now spoken to the alternative motion. Councillor Warland, if you would like to do so, you have up to 5 minutes to wind up.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you, can I say that I'm grateful to councillors for their contributions tonight and indeed to their reflections on this. We are trying to thread a very narrow needle, I understand that. That's very clear. And ordinarily, many of the things that came out in this debate would be things that I myself would actually be fully on board with. But I think Councillor Sousa summed it up best when he said this is really the last roll of the dice. And I think we owe it to our community to ensure that we leave no stone unturned so we have no other questions as to what if. What if we didn't press the button one last time? In particular, I want to speak to the two themes that I kind of got from that debate. The first was around the request of the state, and the second was around what potential methods of funding could be considered under Part 4 of the motion. In respect of the state request, Councillor Choi made the point that I'm paraphrasing here, what is the value of writing to the minister given the recency of the response we got? And again, as I say, normally I would agree. Why I think it's different this time is because we now have updated figures. We have the updated information to go to the state, even if it is merely just a formal process to say, here is where we are now at. As a formality, given that we have put in a request to them and given that we understand there is some appetite for them to see other forms of the RAF put down the pipeline, but that relies, as I said earlier, on us getting the first phase done in the beginning. Secondly, to the methods of funding, and we saw some interaction between councillors and officers in relation to what are some of the items or elements that could be assessed and investigated. Now, am I comfortable with some of those options? Absolutely not. But the point is, and as we saw through those questions and discussion tonight, we haven't actually had that conversation. And if we are going to leave no stone unturned in order to deliver for our community as, in my assessment, they overwhelmingly expect of us to do so, then we should at least understand what the opportunity costs are, so that once we do that, and once we may have resolved any capital shortfall one way or another, we can then, hand on heart, say to our community, we did everything we could. And here were the options, and here were the consequences. And if we, as a group of elected members, were not prepared to accept those consequences, I think our community would live with that better. And so that's why I think those two elements of this motion are important. That's why I've proposed them. That's why I've sought your support. And I would finish by saying that I may have only been in this room for not quite 4 weeks, but I'm not prepared to pronounce the RAF dead on my arrival.
Thank you very much, Councillor Warland. Councillors, I will now put this item to the vote. Please cast your votes. Councillor Cridland, how would you like to vote on Councillor Warland's alternative motion? Councillor Cridland?
Sorry, I had you on mute.
Very good.
I vote yes.
All right, so that means that the vote is tied at 4-4. I'm just going to seek some advice from governance here. Ms Tucker, Mr Adams, I understand in these circumstances where an absolute majority is not required, that I do have a casting vote. Is that correct? That's correct, okay. Well, I use my casting vote in favour of the alternative motion. The alternative motion passes for all, with the Mayor having used his casting vote. That was the only item on the agenda for tonight. We now move to item 8, which is closure. I would like to thank everyone for their participation and attendance this evening. I do declare the meeting closed at 8:04. Thank you all and good night.
Good night.
Sorry, folks. I've just been advised that I did not read out who voted which way on the final vote. So once that comes up on the screen, I will read that just for the benefit of the tape. Here we go. So, those in favour of Councillor Worland's alternative motion were myself, that's Mayor Greg Milner, Councillor Blake D'Souza, Councillor Nick Worland, and Councillor Glenn Cridland. Those against were Councillor Andre Brender-Abrandis, Councillor Mary Choi, Councillor Jennifer Navard, and Councillor Stephen Russell. The vote was tied at 4-4, and the Mayor used his casting vote under the Local Government Act in favour of Councillor Worland's alternative motion. The motion was carried. Thank you all, and good night.